Did you really think that we were done with murder mysteries? Of course not. This is not a well of views that is going to run dry anytime soon. So today, let's examine a few more creepy cases from the past where the killer has never been caught. Number 8, the Happy Valley Murder. When Jocelyn Hay was born in 1901, he already seemed set for life. As the oldest son of British diplomat and Earl of Errol Victor Hay, he stood to inherit his father's title and follow him into a successful career in politics. However, Jocelyn Hay caused a scandal in his early 20s when he married Lady Edina Sackville, a woman who was older than him and twice divorced. Looking to escape the prudish and judgmental nature of England, the two moved to Kenya, where they became part of a group of wealthy expats known as the Happy Valley set, who developed a reputation for parties, booze, and promiscuity. Hay divorced Sackville in 1930, but he married again that same year, and his second wife passed away in 1939. The following year, Hay began a new relationship with Lady Diana Broughton, but there was something different this time. She was married to Sir Jock Delves Broughton. The affair was quite public, so unsurprisingly, the husband found out about it. Allegedly, he tried to convince his wife to leave together to Sri Lanka, then known as Ceylon, but Diana refused because she was head over heels in love with Hay. Then, on the night of January the 24th, 1941, Jocelyn Hay was found slumped over in his car, dead from a single bullet wound to the head. Obviously, everyone thought that Sir Jock Broughton was the killer. He was arrested and charged, but his lawyers pointed out during the trial that nothing directly connected Broughton to the crime, and that there were other people who may have wanted Hay dead, including a former lover with a history of violence. Broughton was acquitted due to a lack of evidence, but he committed suicide a year later. In the minds of many, he still remains the most obvious suspect, although the murder of the Earl of Errol remains officially unsolved. Number 9. Death at Lintz Green. For almost 100 years, Lintz Green was a station in the Derwent Valley Railway in County Durham, England. It closed down in 1963, but still remains notorious due to the unsolved murder of its station master, which occurred in 1911. His name was Joseph Wilson, and he was a 60-year-old man who lived just a stone's throw away from the station. At first, the night of October the 7th, 1911, seemed to be just like any other. Only 3 people were at the Lintz Green station: Wilson, a clerk named Fred White, and the porter, John Rutledge. They were all waiting for the last train of the day from Newcastle, which arrived at 10:42 p.m. Rutledge got on, while 4 other men, all local miners, got off the train and started making their way home. The station master also set off for home, leaving Fred White behind to lock up the office. There were no lampposts, so the night was pitch black, and in the darkness, White heard a gunshot. Then he heard Joseph Wilson's daughter, Bertha, scream out that her father had been shot. White rushed to the scene, as did the 4 miners, who heard the loud noise and came running from the opposite direction. One of them tried performing first aid on Wilson, but it was no use. The station master was dead. The following day, the investigation was in full swing. Wilson didn't seem to have an enemy in the world, so the motive had to be robbery. Lots of people knew that he always carried the day's takings with him at night in a leather pouch, except that he didn't do it on that day. For some reason, he took the money home an hour earlier. The case turned into one of the biggest investigations in the north of England. Police questioned hundreds of people until they arrived at Samuel Atkinson, a 25-year-old relief porter at Lintz Green. They liked him for the crime, and 3 of the miners claimed that they saw him hang around the station late that night. Atkinson was arrested, but the day of his appearance at the assize court, the chief constable claimed there was no evidence against the porter and made the shocking request that Atkinson be discharged. The case was dismissed and the investigation was stopped. What exactly happened has never been established. Number 6. The Hemlock Valley Killings. In 1995, 3 women were killed in the Canadian province of British Columbia under almost identical circumstances. They were all around 30 years old with a history of drugs and prostitution and could usually be found looking for Johns in the downtown East Side neighborhood of Vancouver. All 3 had been found beaten to death and dumped in the wooded areas of Hemlock Valley. The police had no doubt that this was the work of a serial killer. They had even got a really solid suspect named Ronald McCauley. He had been released on parole in 1994 after serving time for rape, but was arrested again in September 1995 after taking a sex worker to Hemlock Valley and beating her senseless. She survived the attack, however, and was able to ID him, which got him locked up for attempted murder. Given the nature of McCauley's crimes, he became a prime suspect in the Hemlock Valley murders, which took place while he was on the loose. However, no definitive links were found, and since McCauley was already in prison and wouldn't be getting out anytime soon, police moved on to other suspects. Over the years, notorious killers such as Gary Ridgway and Robert Picton were put forward as possible culprits without any definitive conclusions. Then, in 2001, it looked like there could be a break in the case due to advances in criminal technology. The killer had left DNA behind. It was deemed unusable during the 1990s, but things were different in 2001. The samples were checked again and they yielded conclusive but surprising results. Roland McCauley was not the killer. DNA evidence cleared him, and although he spent the rest of his life in jail for other crimes, these 3 murders remained unsolved. Number 5. The murder of the second Florence Nightingale. Florence Nightingale, also known as the Lady with a Lamp, is often hailed as the most famous nurse in history for her work during the Crimean War. Following the war in 1865, she became godmother to a second cousin who was named Florence Nightingale Shaw in her honour. Like her famous godmother, Shaw also became a nurse and was decorated for her service during World War I. She survived the horrors of war, only to meet a violent end shortly after returning to England. On January 12, 1920, the 55-year-old Florence Nightingale Shaw left London aboard the 3:20 train to Hastings. Just a few hours later, she was in hospital fighting for her life, a fight which she lost a few days later. So, how did she end up like that? Well, her friend Mabel Rogers had accompanied Shaw to the station to wave her off. She said that as soon as she got up to leave the train, a man entered the carriage where Nightingale was sitting. The two of them were alone for one stop, after which the man got off. At the next stop, 3 workmen boarded the train and entered the carriage, but they left Shaw alone as she was sitting in a dark corner with what appeared to be a veil covering her face, and they thought she was sleeping. It was only a while later that they realized that the veil was in fact a crimson mask of blood that had covered Shaw's face after being clubbed in the head repeatedly. She was taken to the hospital in Hastings, but as we said, she died a few days later. Obviously, the stranger who was alone with Nightingale was the prime suspect, but identifying him proved tricky. Police thought they had a strong candidate when they arrested William Ernest Clements for a separate crime. He fit the description and had a revolver with human blood on it, which could have been the weapon used to bludgeon Shaw. However, neither Mabel Rogers nor the train conductor were able to positively ID him, so police eventually released him, and they never found another strong suspect. Number 4. A murder mystery from outer space. We move on now to Zygmunt Adamski, a Yorkshire coal miner whose death is so strange and mysterious that people have blamed it on aliens. On June 6, 1980, the 56-year-old Adamski left his home in Tingley to go do some shopping, and nobody ever saw him alive again. His wife feared that he may have been kidnapped, but his body was found 5 days later, laying on top of a 10-foot pile of coal in a coal yard about 20 miles from his home. That's when things got weird. Zygmunt had severe burn marks on his back, neck, and shoulders, which had been covered with some kind of ointment that forensic scientists could not identify. His watch and wallet were missing, which is pretty normal, but so was his shirt, even though he was still wearing his suit, which had been improperly fastened over his body. His hair had been cropped short, and he only had day-old beard stubble, even though he'd been missing for 5 days. The authorities were baffled by the circumstances of Zygmunt Adamski's death, so people soon started looking for a paranormal explanation. Obviously, the most sensible solution is that Adamski died after being abducted by a UFO by mistake. Well, maybe sensible is the wrong word to use here, but more plausible explanations are few and far between. Number 3. Death of a governor. George Barrington was an early 18th century policeman who served as governor of North Carolina back when it was still a British colony. He was named governor twice, and each time he was removed from office due to his recalcitrant, confrontational, and at times even violent behaviour. Barrington was an angry man who did not hesitate to throw insults and threats at any person he disliked, which included almost everyone. It's not really a surprise then that by the end of his political career, he had managed to alienate pretty much every person around him. At one point in 1736, he even claimed to have uncovered a plot by 3 provincial officials to assassinate him. Barrington's allegation was never investigated, but it would be pretty fair to say that the man had a lot of enemies. Therefore, when he was murdered in 1759, nobody was really surprised. His death, however, was labelled a robbery gone wrong. While struggling with his attacker, Barrington was overpowered and thrown into the canal. His murder was never solved, and his assailant was never identified. Number 2. The Chrissie Venn tragedy. Next up is a harrowing murder mystery from Australia, where the victim was a 13-year-old girl named Chrissie Venn, who disappeared after leaving her home in the village of North Motton in Tasmania on February 20th, 1921. Once people realised that Chrissie was missing, they conducted an extensive search, that her body was found hidden inside a tree stump. Suspicions soon fell on a local labourer named George William King, based mainly on some scratch marks that he had on his arms at the time of the murder. He was eventually arrested, and his trial began in August. Fortunately for King, he was defended by one of the best lawyers in the country, Albert Ogilvy, who went on to serve as Premier of Tasmania. Ogilvy succeeded in destroying the case against his client by showing that the evidence was unreliable and speculative, while the investigation had been handled with incompetence by the police and the local coroner. Specifically, he argued that the police ignored multiple leads once they made up their mind that King was the killer, while the coroner mishandled several pieces of evidence. The jury found George King not guilty. His acquittal was followed by several resignations from the investigators, but no other arrests were ever made in the murder case. Number 1. A killer at Gorse Hall. For hundreds of years, Gorse Hall stood as one of the most impressive manors in the Greater Manchester area of England. Only ruins remain today, as the house was demolished during the early 20th century following the murder of its owner, George Harry Storrs. A successful mill owner, Storrs was one of the wealthiest men in the country. Then, for reasons known only to himself, in late 1909, he started fearing for his life. On September the 10th, he reported to the police that a stranger had fired shots through his window. The police investigated and couldn't find any traces of gunshots. They concluded that Storrs probably made the whole thing up, but since he was a very prominent and influential man, they decided to start patrolling the estate anyway, just in case. As another security measure, they also installed a giant bell on the roof, which could be heard over long distances. But perhaps Storrs did have something to fear after all, because an armed stranger showed up at Gorse Hall on November the 1st. He got into a fight with Storrs, who prompted his wife to go ring the bell. This attracted the attention of 2 constables who rushed to Gorse Hall, but by the time they reached the scene of the crime, they found George Harry Storrs lying in a pool of blood, having been stabbed 15 times. 2 men were charged with the murder separately, but both were acquitted. One was a cousin named Cornelius Howard, and the other was a local man named Mark Wild. But if Storrs feared either of these men, why would he not just tell the police? Why would he fake an attack on himself? Police speculate that Storrs wanted police protection without actually saying why, because he feared a scandal. There were rumours that Storrs had an affair with the governess of a friend named Maria Hull. She committed suicide in 1907, possibly after getting pregnant. So could it be that Storrs' murder was revenge by somebody close to her? We just don't know. And I do hope you found this video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely enjoy my podcast, The Casual Criminalist. I'll link to that below. And thank you for watching.